The person that kidnapped, then killed 9-year-old Laura Arroyo made no effort to hide her body. It didn't take investigators long to make the connection to a reported kidnapping last night.
There was a knock on the door. The 9-year-old female answered the door, and by the time the parent got to the door, the child was gone. The door apparently was still open.
She was laying right in this area here. Her head was open to the point that you could see her skull.
The news of what police found in this office parkway travels quickly, eventually reaching the doorstep of a father who refuses to believe he will never see his little girl again.
That's a mistake. It's somebody else. It's not my... That's for sure. It's not my little girl. Gonna be somebody else. She was everything for me, my little girl.
She has several chop injuries of her head that have gone through her skull and into the brain. And then she has 10 of these penetrating spear-type injuries, several that have gone through her torso. They've gone through both lungs, went through the heart. So all of these injuries are considered to be working as a group to cause her death.
Laura was found fully clothed, with no sign of sexual trauma, but a rape kit is done as a matter of procedure.
Each area that we swab, we usually take a packet of 4.
The swabs are taken in the off chance sperm could be identified.
As you can see on the screen here, this is what sperm would look like on such a slide. This is a control that is nothing but sperm. You can see how bright fluorescent red they are.
When Laura's slides are examined, however, this is not what the medical examiner sees.
There were no sperm. No sperm were found on the smear.
Detectives operate under the assumption that no sexual assault actually took place, and the swabs are not sent out for additional testing. Meantime, detectives begin their digging.
We felt like it was probably somebody she knew because there's no sounds, there's no screams. Somebody, lured her away from that door very easily.
Elizabeth Alcarez is a playmate of Laura's and had been outside with her earlier the same evening she went missing.
Well, those were the steps towards Leonor's house, and she lived right in front. So we were just sitting there, and we were just talking and playing.
What became significant in talking with her is that she told us that Jessica's dad had walked by.
Jessica's dad is a man named Manuel Bracamontes, who was dating the mother of one of Laura's playmates.
So he passed by, and the first time he didn't say anything, and then a little bit later he passed by again. And I believe that's when he pointed towards me and he said, "Your parents are looking for you." I went and knocked at my door, and I asked my mom. I kind of opened the door and I said, "Mom, did you call me? A man said that you were looking for me." And she said, "No."
We thought that was significant. We felt that was probably his attempt to separate Laura from the other 2 girls.
This is somebody that we've got to get a hold of, talk to, find out what he saw.
I think one of the first things when we talked about, that it was the murder of Laura Arroyo and that he knew her, he kind of said something like, I've kind of seen her around the neighborhood, something like that. And we both kind of went, what? Because we knew that Laura played with his girlfriend's daughter, Jessica. We knew he had been around there and played with the kids and such. So, he was minimizing, basically. That's what he was doing. And that kind of perked our interest.
Detectives asked Bracamontes if he was in the neighborhood the night Laura went missing.
He either denied being there when we asked him about it, or came out and told us that he didn't know anything because he wasn't there.
Bracamontes' story doesn't play with what detectives are hearing in the neighborhood. More than 2 weeks later, they sit down again with Bracamontes, this time on their turf.
Basically, his alibi was I was home with my mother. We did talk to 2 other men who lived in the area. As they described the timing, right at the time that Laura would have gone downstairs to answer the door and disappeared, they see his black Jetta leaving the parking lot. Almost everyone had a very strong response to what they thought should happen to the person that did this. Many people said they should be killed. People made physical threats. If I ever catch the guy who did this, I'll do some terrible thing to them. With Manuel, when we ask him that question, shrug of the shoulders, look at the ground, I don't know. Maybe go to jail forever.
Because, man, we have people that put you there at that time, and you haven't told us that. That's what.
And you can see the lack of response from him, just nothing.
And an innocent person, you accuse somebody of something as horrific as this, they're going to come out of that seat like a spring under their butt and deny it.
I have the right to walk under. That's what I told you earlier.
Bracamontes ends the talk, but not before detectives mention one more thing.
This is the part where I told him we have the search warrant.
What we have is a search warrant, and we're going to take hair samples and blood samples.
Bracamontes gets the full workup. Hair, blood, even his home and car are searched.
We believe that the instrument used to kill Laura was probably a pickaxe or pickmatic that had a bladed surface on one end, a pick on the other end. We were going to be looking for any kind of puncturing and bladed type objects that could have inflicted these kind of wounds.
Detectives don't find a murder weapon. Fibers from one of Bracamontes' sweaters, however, provides a possible forensic link.
The fiber from one of those sweaters matched one of the fibers found on her clothing.
The link to Bracamontes is tenuous at best, and the DA decides to take a pass. A year has passed since Laura Arroyo was found murdered, but Chula Vista police still have Manuel Bracamontes on the brain and decide to give their suspect another shot.
Well, I told him I want to clarify some things in reference to the crime and...
Sergeant Bob Rutledge asks Bracamontes to come down to the station and hopes that his suspect might finally fess up.
There's several people that said that they saw you there that night.
Yeah.
Somewhere between 8:30 and 9.
No, that's not. That couldn't be. As we took off, it was like it was still kind of daylight.
Bracamontes still denies being at the apartment that evening, but he does remember seeing the 9-year-old that day.
When you were there earlier, did you see the little girl, little Laura?
There was a lot of kids playing. Yeah, she was out there.
This contradicts Bracamontes' earlier statements about not seeing or really knowing Laura Arroyo.
Where did you see her?
By like the neighbor that lived across the street from her. She was running back and forth.
Rutledge is hoping a few more minutes with the suspect might lead to more admissions, but that doesn't happen.
Actually, the interview ended when his beeper went off.
Bracamontes ends the interview and walks out of the police station, once again a free man. Laura's case goes cold and remains that way for 11 years, until a second look at some old evidence takes everyone by surprise.
These are sperm cells which were observed on the oral swabs from Laura. There were approximately 10,000 sperm cells. Once the sperm cells were identified, I proceeded with DNA testing, and I was able to generate a DNA profile from the sperm from a single male individual.
Hair samples taken from Manuel Bracamontes in 1991 are sent into the lab for comparison.
Only a few days after that was my phone call to you to indicate that, in fact, the DNA from this semen was a perfect match to your suspect.
I just couldn't believe it when you told me that. I was so happy, and everybody was. Everybody was happy about that.
On October 24th, DA investigator Robert Marquez prepares to arrest Manuel Bracamontes.
There's a light, like a bluish-colored SUV Ford Explorer type vehicle comes, rounds the corner and proceeds eastbound. And he stops right in the middle of the roadway in front of the residence. And I tell my partner, that's our guy.
Marquez approaches the car as it parks outside the home.
And as I did so, I pulled my hand back like this to expose my weapon and my badge so that he could clearly see that I was a law enforcement officer, because he didn't know me. As I approached, I saw him rolling down the window. As he turns to look at my partner, I could hear him say, "You're under arrest." And I could hear, Bracamontes said something, but the only word I could hear him say was, "What for?" My partner says, "For murder."
The suspect takes off. Investigators fire 2 rounds at the vehicle, but miss. Bracamontes gets lost in traffic and alerts are put out. The Mexican border crossing only 4 miles away is notified.
Chula Vista Police Department were doing a search of different motels and hotels in the city of Chula Vista to see if maybe by chance he had returned to Chula Vista, and they located his vehicle in a parking lot.
Bracamontes is nowhere to be found, and a tracking device is placed on the car. Investigators hope Bracamontes will return to the vehicle. The following morning, he does.
The officers were telling us that the suspect, Bracamontes, had actually rammed one of our police cars and had completed a U-turn on the ramp and was now going to go southbound in the northbound lanes of the freeway.
Harris spots the car. Bracamontes is heading straight at him.
I was determined not to let him go free. I was not going to let him get away from us.
Sergeant Harris steps on the gas, holds onto the wheel, and goes head-to-head with his suspect.
At the last second, he decided that he didn't want to do that, so he turned hard right, and that's when his vehicle lost control and he rolled it over.
Bracamontes is taken into custody, unharmed, and arrested for the murder of Laura Arroyo. Additional testing finds trace amounts of Bracamontes' DNA under the 9-year-old's fingernails and on her neck.
How could we go from no evidence in the case to suddenly an avalanche of DNA? Of course, the answer to that is the truth, which is things have changed. The screening processes, we know a lot more about screening evidence for biological DNA than we did back then.
You know, to have the guy over there who killed my little girl, and you have to stop everything. You know, nothing you can do. You know, when I see the guy, you know, I want to kill the guy. I want to, you know.
On September 2nd, 2005, the jury hands down its verdict: guilty. Bracamontes now sits on California's death row.